I want you to put yourself in this room for a moment. Just, imagine you're sitting at a dinner table surrounded by the people you've known literally your entire life.
Right, your family.
Exactly, your family. And it's a completely unremarkable evening. Plates are clinking. Multiple conversations are overlapping. It's just the ambient noise of a family existing together. And in this quiet lull, you decide to ask a really simple, factual question about your own life.
Just a basic detail.
Yeah, you ask for a date or a name. Or maybe a piece of paper that documents your own historical record. And, suddenly the entire room just stops.
The air just completely thickens, doesn't it?
It does. You can almost physically feel the barometric pressure drop in the room. The person across from you goes rigidly silent. Someone else sighs, right, and pushes their chair back and announces they need to go do something in the other room.
Yeah, fleeing the scene.
Right. And before you even realize what's happening, the conversation has morphed, the tone has totally weaponized, and you are being quietly, structurally accused of betrayal.
All for asking a basic question.
Literally a fundamental question about your own factual history. So why does seeking a basic truth trigger such an explosive, coordinated shutdown from a group of people who were supposedly, bound by love?
Well, you're hitting on the exact reason these systems eventually break down. Because in that moment at the dinner table, the shutdown has absolutely nothing to do with the birth certificate or the name or the date you just asked for.
It's about something else entirely.
Right. It is about the structural integrity of the room itself. When a family system freezes like that, you are witnessing the actual mechanics of how groups of people unconsciously agree to hide things.
And how aggressively they protect those hidden things, too.
Exactly, at all costs.
So we are looking at the architecture of that silence today. We're diving into the hidden mechanics of family systems and this overarching concept of manufactured consensus.
Which is such a fascinating way to frame it.
It really is. Our focus for this deep dive is on the systemic mechanisms of adoption, specifically looking at a framework called distributed silence. The source material we have is a profound set of drafts and reports centered on an article titled, Distributed Silence, How Adoptive Families Manufacture Consensus.
And this framework is just so eye-opening because it examines how silence isn't just kept by one person standing guard at a door.
Right. It's not just one villain.
No, it's distributed like weight across the entire foundation of a family. But I do think we need to establish the parameters of this conversation right up front.
Oh, absolutely. The tone setting is crucial here.
Right, because the lens the author uses is hyper-specific.
Right.
We are utilizing what the text calls honest adoption language, and we are holding a strictly post-tragic tone.
Which basically means we are looking at this without all the usual protective padding. We aren't here to, offer false comfort.
Right, no toxic positivity.
Exactly. And we aren't framing the lived experience of an adoptee as just a symptom to be managed. A post-tragic tone requires a certain level of intellectual and emotional stamina from you, the listener.
It really does.
Yeah.
It means we are going to look unflinchingly at structural harm and structural loss.
Yeah, we have to acknowledge that some things are deeply broken, and we absolutely refuse to pretend they can be fixed with, a positive attitude or a reframed mindset.
And that refusal of false comfort is essential to understanding the text. If you try to apply a glossy cinematic resolution to the mechanics we are about to discuss,
the whole analysis just completely falls apart.
It does. You have to be willing to sit in the discomfort of unresolvable tension.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think we should dismantle the cinematic version first, just to sort of clear the debris.
That's a good place to start.
Because I think you and I and everyone listening are already highly familiar with the standard tropes of adoption narratives. We all know the prevailing myth of the single gatekeeper.
Oh, right. The one person controlling everything.
Yeah, it's usually framed as the adoptive mother. She is seen as the sole architect of the family's official chosen child story, right? Like she holds the keys to the file cabinet.
She's the singular force blocking the adoptee from their origins.
Exactly. And we know that dynamic exists in the real world. Obviously, it happens. But focusing on that single villain trope seems to completely miss the actual pathology of a family system.
It misses it entirely. And worse than that, it acts as a really convenient decoy.
A decoy? How so?
Well, if you focus all your analytical energy on the single gatekeeper, you do a massive disservice to the truth of how human ecosystems actually function. It lets the rest of the household completely off the hook.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Right. It treats the father, the siblings, the extended family as if they are just these passive bystanders who are tragically swept up in one person's narrative control.
Which completely defies every law of group psychology. I mean, a single person cannot maintain a decades-long reality distortion field without the active complicity of literally everyone else in the environment.
Precisely. You can't just blame one person. The shift in perspective here requires a systemic read. Silence in a family is almost never imposed by dictatorial will.
Right. It is manufactured by consensus.
Manufactured by consensus, exactly.
But it's an uncoordinated consensus, though, right? Like, that's the most insidious part of this whole framework.
Right. It's not planned out.
No, nobody is calling a family meeting on a Sunday night and saying, all right, everyone, if the adoptee ever brings up their biological family, here is the playbook.
Right. Like, John, you deflect with a joke.
Yeah. Mary, you act incredibly hurt so they feel guilty. Grandma, you just stare at your plate. There is no mastermind behind it.
There is no coordinated plan at all. What you're describing, what the text points out, is uncoordinated self-interest.
Uncoordinated self-interest. That's a great term for it.
It is entirely self-organizing. Each participant in that room has their own deeply personal reason to avoid the topic.
Right.
And when the topic is breached, each person just instinctively deploys their own avoidance tactic.
And the sheer volume of those avoidance tactics happening simultaneously creates this impenetrable wall.
Exactly. The father leaving for the garage, the sibling going quiet, the mother looking wounded. Each individual action just reinforces the others.
So if everyone in this house is supposedly operating under the foundational promise of adoption, which, is absolute equality, the idea that the adoptee is fully chosen, fully belonging.
Indistinguishable from anyone else in the family unit.
Right. But if they are indistinguishable, yet they're the only person being asked to swallow their own history to keep the peace. I mean, that completely breaks the foundational promise, doesn't it?
Oh, it shatters it. It reveals it as a conditional contract.
A conditional contract. Wow.
And that right there is the adoptee paradox in its purest form. The text highlights this beautifully. The adoptee is structurally the only person in that entire house who is required to either accept a massive, suffocating silence about their own factual existence or
become the designated disruptor who breaks the peace for everyone else.
Exactly. It's a staggering burden.
It really is. To be told you are an equal member of a happy family, but your basic curiosity about your own sealed birth record is treated as an existential threat to the family's survival.
Right, because if the system is supposedly built on love and equality, a request for a piece of paper shouldn't threaten it.
It shouldn't. And the fact that it does threaten it means the silence they are guarding isn't just about the adoptee's origins.
Right. This is where we look underneath the floorboards, so to speak. The silence isn't just covering the adoptee's file. The silence is covering the entire room.
Right.
This is the core mechanism of distributed silence.
Okay, let's pull that apart, because this concept of distributed silence, or I think the text also calls it collusive concealment.
Yes, collusive concealment.
Right. It completely reorients how you view a family dynamic. The subsonic truth here is that almost everyone sitting at that dinner table is carrying their own deeply buried, completely unprocessed material.
And the darkest irony is that none of this buried material actually required the adoption to exist.
Right. It predates the adoptee entirely.
Every single person in that family system maintains what the author calls a private ledger of loss.
A private ledger of loss. I love that phrasing.
And they have all tacitly agreed never to audit each other's ledgers.
Because if you audit one, you have to audit them all. The specifics of these private ledgers are just devastating when you really look at them. Like, think about the adoptive mother in this framework.
She's carrying so much.
She is. She is very often carrying a profound tectonic grief over infertility. But she lives in a society that absolutely forbids her from naming that infertility as a permanent grief.
Right, because the societal mandate of toxic positivity dictates that the arrival of a child, any child by any means, is supposed to act as an eraser.
Like it just magically wipes the slate clean.
Exactly. Society basically tells her, motherhood arrived, the outcome looks like the one you wanted. You have a baby in the crib, so any lingering grief is now officially categorized as ingratitude.
Which is just a brutal psychological trap. So her grief is buried alive. She is not allowed to mourn the biological child she couldn't have, because to do so would, it would imply she isn't perfectly fulfilled by the adopted child she does have.
Right. She has to perform absolute uncomplicated joy.
And that performance forces her infertility grief to become this subterranean force. It doesn't go away, obviously.
No, it just calcifies. It hardens.
And then, okay, you move one seat over at the table, right, to
Yeah.
the adoptive father. The mechanics of his silence are often entirely different, but they are equally rigid.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He is carrying a silent version of that same infertility grief or maybe a loss of biological continuity.
But his context is different.
Right, especially if you look at the historical and sociological context for older generations. Men were given absolutely zero vocabulary to process feelings of biological inadequacy.
Society just didn't equip them for it.
Not at all. The mourning of a bloodline, the failure to reproduce in a society that quietly equates male biology with virility and legacy, it was unspeakable for him.
He literally lacks the language for it. It's not just that he isn't allowed to speak it. The words physically do not exist in his emotional lexicon.
Exactly.
So his ledger of loss is locked away behind this thick wall of mid-century stoicism or just extreme emotional distance.
And then you have to factor in the siblings, too.
Right, because they have their own ledgers.
Whether they are biological or adopted, it doesn't really matter. You have the biological sibling who is keenly aware that they are viewed by the extended family as, the real child.
The seamless child.
Right. And they carry a quiet, corrosive survivor's guilt about that. They know they have a privilege in the family structure.
Or, on the flip side, you have the sibling who is relentlessly parentified.
Yes, the parentified sibling is a huge part of this.
The family system was so completely consumed with either managing the adoptee struggles or just maintaining the shiny family narrative that this sibling had to become a miniature adult just to avoid adding to the parental burden.
They're essentially grieving a normal, invisible, carefree childhood that they had to sacrifice to keep the family ecosystem stable.
And we haven't even touched the extended family yet. Like, imagine the grandparents sitting at the end of the table.
Right, the grandparents. They are operating on an entirely different axis.
They are protecting a load-bearing story.
Load-bearing stories are just fascinating because they function almost like religious mythology within a family.
Oh, totally. It's the narrative of the proud rescue, right?
Yes, it's the story the grandfather told at a christening 50 years ago about how this family stepped up and saved a child.
Right. It positioned the family as inherently noble, as saviors.
And half a century later, that savior narrative is structurally load-bearing for their entire sense of identity and pride. It's a sunk cost fallacy on an emotional level.
Like, it is far too costly in their final decades of life to revise that story and admit that the rescue actually involved profound trauma, severance, and systemic coercion.
Exactly. They will defend that christening story to the death. Because if it falls, their entire conception of their own goodness falls with it.
So you look at this room again with all of this in mind. You have the mother's buried infertility, the father's unspeakable biological grief, the siblings' parentified resentment, the grandparents' load-bearing savior myth.
And every single one of these griefs is profoundly private.
Yeah.
None of them are actually about the adoptee.
But they are all protected by the exact same silence.
Yes, they all utilize the same architecture of concealment, which creates an incredibly dangerous dynamic when the adoptee begins to search for their own truth.
The text conceptualizes this as an identity gravity well.
Yes, an identity gravity well.
I'm trying to picture this mechanically because I feel like understanding the mechanism is key here. If I'm the adoptee, here's where it gets really interesting. It feels like going into a massive bank vault.
Okay, right.
All I want to do is open my one tiny safety deposit box. I have the key. It's my box. It has my name on it. I just want to pull out my original birth certificate. But for some reason, the physical act of turning the key in my one little box automatically blows the steel doors off every other vault in the entire building.
That's a perfect analogy.
But I'm struggling with why that happens. The bank manager didn't maliciously wire my box to explode the others on purpose, right?
No, they didn't have to wire it maliciously.
Yeah.
The wiring isn't a deliberate trap. It's just a byproduct of the environment. The reason your key blows the other doors off is that the entire building is running on the exact same closed electrical circuit.
The silence is the circuit.
Exactly. The silence isn't localized to your file. The silence is the electricity running through the walls of the whole building. So when you introduce a demand for objective truth into a system that is entirely powered by subjective concealment, you short-circuit the whole grid.
Wow. So when the adoptee reaches for their subsonic truth, they aren't just tugging at a loose thread on their own sweater. The gravity of their search threatens to pull everyone else's buried material up to the surface simultaneously.
Right. Because if the adoptee forces the family to acknowledge that the adoption involved profound trauma and loss, rather than just being this beautiful, seamless rescue, then the mother's toxic positivity shield shatters.
And she has to finally face her infertility.
Right, and the father has to face his biological grief. The grandparents have to face the fact that their savior myth is built on someone else's tragedy.
And nobody wants their vault blown open, so the system violently fights back against the person holding the key.
Which brings us to the nature of the family's response, and why it is always so deeply asymmetrical to the adoptee's request.
It really is wildly disproportionate. An adoptee asks for a factual document, a piece of medical history, a name, a date. It is a tiny, specific administrative request.
It's a basic fact.
Yeah, and the response from the family system is like a Category 5 hurricane. It's weeks of icy coldness. It's dramatic accusations of ingratitude.
Weeping phone calls, triangulated text messages.
Right, and a sudden, intense freeze-out. And for years, the adoptee is gaslit into reading that explosive response as evidence that they are the ones who are broken.
That they asked the wrong way, or they were too aggressive.
Or that their need for truth is actually a character flaw.
But the disproportionate response isn't about the size of the adoptee's question at all. It is a measurement of the sheer volume of unrelated things that question puts at risk.
All those private ledgers.
Right. None of those family members consented to having their own deep emotional material dragged to the surface. But critically, they cannot say that out loud.
Because to name the fear is to admit you've been carrying the grief. I mean, a mother cannot say, please don't search for your birth mother, because it forces me to confront the fact that my body couldn't carry a child. And I have never processed that inadequacy.
She just can't say that.
Yeah. She can't. So the resistance has to be displaced. It is entirely projected onto the adoptee.
The family system unconsciously collaborates to frame the search, not as a quest for factual truth, but as a referendum on the adoptee's loyalty.
It gets framed as a betrayal of the family's love, or an act of profound greed.
It's a structural deflection.
And there's a nuance here that completely rewired how I think about emotional economies, honestly. In a system like this, grief is not a scarce resource.
Not at all.
It's not like there's only enough room for one person to be sad. Grief is actually in massive surplus. The mother, the father, the sibling, the adoptee, everyone is swimming in it.
What is scarce is permission.
Permission. The certification of the grief.
Right, and this scarcity of permission creates the sharpest asymmetry in the whole system. We really have to look at how society categorizes pain, dividing it into sanctioned grief and unsanctioned grief.
Sanctioned versus unsanctioned. Break that down for me.
Well, the adoptive mother's infertility grief, even if she hides it at the dinner table, is highly legible to society. People understand it.
Right. If it were to come out, she would receive immediate sympathy.
Exactly. The grandparents' stubborn clinging to a 50-year-old rescue story is legible to society as a form of fierce, albeit misguided protective love. Even the siblings' resentment over parentification is a highly recognized, validated psychological dynamic in therapy today.
But the adoptee's grief over the severance from their origins, that is the only grief in the entire house that the system absolutely refuses to certify as real.
It is entirely unsanctioned.
It's unsanctioned because sanctioning it would validate the adoptee's search. So the system doesn't just deny the grief, it actively neutralizes it by relabeling it.
Relabeling is key here. The adoptee's perfectly natural mourning for a lost origin, their biological imperative to know where they come from, suddenly gets pathologized.
It gets weaponized against them using the language of mental health, which is so incredibly damaging. The family calls it an obsession. They frame it as an inability to move on.
They tell the adoptee they are stuck in the past, that they need therapy to manage their fixation, rather than acknowledging it as a profound structural loss that simply requires truth to heal.
It's a brilliant, terrible defense mechanism. If the system can label the adoptee as psychologically unstable for wanting a birth certificate, then the system doesn't have to change.
Right. They just have to manage the unstable person.
I think anyone listening right now can map this onto other systems in their life. Like, think about a workplace, or a tight-knit community organization. Have you ever seen a massive structural problem like genuine dysfunction, mismanagement, toxicity written off by the group as just one person having a bad attitude?
Oh, all the time. It happens everywhere.
Right. The whole office says, oh, Dave just has a problem with authority, or Sarah is just impossible to please. It is a defense mechanism to protect the status quo. Because if Dave is just crazy, the company doesn't have to overhaul its toxic culture.
Exactly. That is exactly what this family system is doing to the adoptee.
And untangling a defense mechanism that is that deeply embedded is not a quick process, which requires us to completely discard the compressed timeline we usually associate with these
We
narratives.
have to throw out the cinematic timeline completely.
The movie version, right? Where the adoptee goes on this emotional weekend road trip, finds the missing document in a dusty courthouse, has a tearful confrontation with the family, everyone cries, they hug, closure is instantly achieved, and the credits roll.
That compressed timeline does immense psychological damage, really, because it sets up an expectation of a quick fix for an architecture that took decades to build.
It's totally unrealistic.
The reality is that processing this takes a working lifetime.
Decades, literally decades.
The term the author uses here is achieving post-tragic consciousness. And this is not something you arrive at after a few hard conversations or a month of journaling.
No, it's painstakingly built.
It involves years, often decades, of the adoptee acting as a silent observer, absorbing evidence. And I don't just mean finding physical birth documents. I mean absorbing patterns of behavior.
Watching the micro expressions.
Yes. Watching the father's jaw clench every time genetics are mentioned on television. Watching the mother overcompensate with toxic positivity during holidays. Watching how the system reacts, adjusts, and settles again and again over the years.
All while the rest of the family has decided the matter is entirely settled. The family says, we talked about this 5 years ago. Why are you still bringing it up? Meanwhile, the adoptee is quietly building an internal, airtight case study of the family's pathology.
And achieving post-tragic consciousness means reaching a state of profound lucidity. It is the ability to hold the tragic, deeply unfair reality of your history without collapsing into a puddle of despair, but also without numbing out and pretending it doesn't hurt.
You see the machinery of the family clearly for exactly what it is.
See the wiring.
Right, the wiring. And this brings us to what I honestly found to be the most staggering, devastating paradox in this entire framework, the concept of the second exile.
It's a brutal concept.
It really is. And I have a really hard time accepting this premise purely from a psychological standpoint because it completely defies how we think human relationships are supposed to work.
Walk me through your friction with it. Where does it bump up against your expectations?
Okay, so we are supposedly wired to seek resolution and equilibrium, right? If I am an adoptee and before I do the work, I am a mess. I'm reactive, I'm angry, I'm constantly picking fights at dinner, I'm emotionally volatile. That is exhausting for a family to manage.
Right, it's high conflict.
High conflict. Now, suppose I go away. I spend a decade doing the grueling internal work. I achieve this post-tragic consciousness you're talking about. I become calm. I become lucid, peaceful, non-reactive. A family system should logically prefer that state of equilibrium.
You think so?
Right. Why would a family system punish the removal of conflict? Why does achieving clarity and peace actually cost the adoptee the relationship?
It's a highly logical pushback, but it's based on a flawed assumption about what the family system actually wants.
What do you mean?
You are equating lucidity with the removal of conflict. But in this specific architecture, lucidity is the conflict.
Wait, really? Explain that. How is being calm and clear-eyed a conflict?
Because clarity is exactly what the family's consensus was built to prevent. You have to remember the distributed silence framework we just mapped out. A family system can actually tolerate a wounded, confused adoptee remarkably well.
They can.
Oh, yes. A confused adoptee who is crying, who feels fundamentally broken, who eventually accepts being told they are overthinking it or being too sensitive. That adoptee is not a structural threat to the vault. They're just a problem to be managed.
Ah, wow. And managing a problem keeps everyone comfortably in their familiar roles.
Exactly. The parents get to maintain their identities as the benevolent saviors or the patient managers of a difficult child. The messy emotions of the adoptee actually validate the family's narrative that the adoptee needs them.
So they prefer the mess.
They do, unconsciously. Because a lucid adoptee, an adoptee who sits calmly at that dinner table and doesn't take the bait, an adoptee who can look around the room and name precisely which grief the father is protecting, which guilt the sibling is hiding, and exactly how the family's resistance functions to maintain the silence. That presence is an absolute existential threat to the room's consensus.
They become a lucid observer in a room that strictly requires blindness to survive.
Yes, the system was built to avoid renegotiation. And a lucid adoptee forces a renegotiation just by existing in the space.
Because their clarity makes it impossible for the family to keep playing their assigned roles. I mean, the mother cannot play the unblemished savior if the adoptee calmly recognizes her unprocessed infertility.
Right, so the system rejects them. The family that could tolerate a volatile, wounded adoptee for decades absolutely cannot tolerate a clear-eyed, healed one.
This is the cruelty of the second exile. The adoptee pays twice.
They do.
They pay the first time in childhood, suffering the original severance from their origins without their consent, and then they pay a second time, decades later.
Just when they have done the agonizing, lonely internal work that should have earned them understanding, mutual respect, and repair.
That very understanding makes them eligible to a family that is entirely committed to keeping the old story fixed.
The system doesn't punish them for not knowing. It punishes them for knowing too well.
It's genuinely chilling when you map it onto real human behavior. You do the work to heal, and your reward is permanent estrangement, because your healing threatens their camouflage.
And this is where the framework takes its heaviest turn, I think. Because if you only look backward at the adoptive family, at the adoptee's childhood, you're only seeing half the chain.
Right, because distributed silence is not a closed loop that ends with the adoptee.
No, the adoptee's generation is not the floor. The chain runs forward, too, into the adoptee's own biological children.
This is the part that requires an immense amount of grace to look at, because it asks the adoptee to pivot from examining the damage that was done to them to examining the potential damage they themselves might be unconsciously causing.
It forces a reckoning with intergenerational transmission.
Yeah.
And to understand how it transmits, we really have to look at the survival adaptations the adoptee built in childhood.
Let's break those adaptations down. Because when you are an adoptee, spending decades metabolizing a severance you didn't choose, living inside a family system that actively, systemically gaslights your need for truth, you don't just sit there.
No, you adapt.
You build an architecture of self-protection. It's a biological imperative to survive your environment.
You learn very quickly that withholding your true feelings is the only way to stay safe. If expressing curiosity about your origins gets you frozen out, you learn to swallow the curiosity.
You learn that maintaining physical and emotional distance is a way to maintain control in a house where you literally have none. You develop an extreme, almost fierce self-sufficiency.
Because deep in your pre-verbal nervous system, the alternative to self-sufficiency once felt like literal abandonment.
And we must be incredibly precise here, using that post-tragic lens we talked about. None of these adaptations are character flaws?
Absolutely not. They are highly intelligent, highly effective behavioral responses.
They kept a child psychologically intact inside a system that was structurally designed to erase their origins.
The tragedy, though, is that adaptations built for survival in a hostile environment don't have an automatic off switch.
No, they don't.
You don't just shed a foundational nervous system response the day you bring your own biological baby home from the hospital.
Which introduces a mechanism referred to in the text as weaponized inverted maternal grief.
Yes, it's a dense term, but a critical one. The core concept is that grief and silence, when they are never allowed to be named or processed, do not evaporate at the end of a generation.
They transmit.
They transmit, but they transmit in an altered, mutated form. The exact same emotional withholding that protected the adoptee as a child can unconsciously become the default reflex they use as a parent.
It's an unconscious replication of the mechanics, even if the content is different. There's a deeply unsettling reality here. Children can feel the shape of a silence long before they have the vocabulary to name what the silence is hiding.
Children are basically seismic detectors. They are incredibly attuned to the emotional atmosphere of a home.
Right.
They can feel the presence of a locked vault in their parent's psyche. They might not know what's inside the vault, but they feel the coldness radiating off the steel door.
And the heartbreak is that you can have an adoptee parent who has spent their entire adult life fiercely fighting for transparency, a parent who swore a blood oath, I will never lie to my kids, I will never hide things from them the way my adoptive family hid my history from me, I will be completely open.
But the body keeps the score.
Right. Because these survival patterns of withholding and emotional distance were installed in the pre-verbal trauma of early severance, installed before they even possess language, they can still completely accidentally replicate the very emotional distance they suffered from.
They replicate the atmospheric pressure of the distributed silence, even while explicitly telling the truth.
So if a system is this deeply distributed, right, running on automatic pilot across generations, bypassing language entirely, how do you stop it? Because it feels like the natural reaction to realizing you might be passing this on is immense, crushing guilt.
And that is exactly where the post-tragic tone acts as a lifeline. Guilt is completely useless in this framework.
Useless.
Utterly useless. Naming this intergenerational transmission is not a self-indictment. It is not about heaping moral failing onto the adoptee parent. A system this entrenched does not get interrupted by a parent feeling guilty.
So what interrupts it?
Precision. Cold, clear, forensic precision.
Like tracking the mechanics?
Yeah. Exactly. You have to know exactly which inherited reflex is operating in real time. When you feel that sudden, inexplicable urge to emotionally withdraw from your child during a moment of conflict, you need the analytical precision to stop and say, that is the survival adaptation I learned in a house of silence.
You separate yourself from the reflex?
Right. You say, that is not me, that is the architecture I was forced to build. Only when you can name the mechanism with that level of precision can you deliberately, manually choose to do something else.
You have to catch the ghost in the machine.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of this entire deep dive. Where does the agency actually live? Because if the family consensus is structurally manufactured against you, and achieving clarity gets you exiled in the second exile, and your own nervous system survival instincts are working against your parenting, where is the foothold? What do you actually do?
Well, we promised no false comfort, and this is where that promise matters most. The brutal truth is that your adoptive family might never unseal their material.
They might just take it to the grave.
They might take their private ledgers of loss straight to the grave. The mother might never admit her infertility grief. The father might never find the words. The grandparents will die clutching their load-bearing rescue story.
And some of those doors that slam shut during the second exile are going to remain permanently structurally shut.
Yes. And the vital reframe for the listener, the post-tragic reframe, is that the door isn't shut because you did something wrong.
It isn't shut because you failed to explain yourself well enough or because you weren't patient enough.
The door is shut because you finally did something right. You broke the consensus.
You broke the consensus. Wow.
Exactly. Agency does not begin with changing their minds. Agency begins with reframing the questions you ask yourself in the quiet of your own mind. Once you fully understand the mechanics of this system, distributed silence, the identity gravity, the second exile, the forward chain into your children, your entire internal monologue shifts.
The friction points change. Instead of agonizing, why doesn't my brother believe me? Why doesn't he take my side? And internalizing that as a referendum on whether your brother genuinely loves you, it becomes a cold, structural observation.
It becomes predictable.
Right. Of course, my brother doesn't back me up. It's a highly predictable output of a system where he desperately needs his own story of the family to stay fixed in order to survive.
It depersonalizes the rejection entirely. Or you take the question, why did my own child grow up feeling a version of the emotional distance I swore I'd never repeat? It stops being agonizing proof of your fundamental, irreversible failure as a parent.
It stops being a reason to collapse into shame.
Instead, it becomes the precise intervention point. Recognizing the pattern is the first step in dismantling it.
So agency is absolutely not found in getting the family to finally agree with you. It's not found in holding a dramatic family meeting, laying out all the evidence, and forcing everyone to confess to their private ledgers of loss.
That is a fool's errand. The truth of where you come from, the factual reality of your origins, does not require your family's consensus to be true.
It is true regardless of whether they acknowledge it.
Exactly. True agency is found in the meticulous act of building your own independent record. A documented, provenance-first record of your own life.
Provenance first, meaning the undeniable physical, historical facts of where you originated. Documented and witnessed by people who are not structurally, emotionally, or financially invested in keeping your story hidden.
You build a record that exists completely outside the jurisdiction of the family's consensus, and in doing so, you realize that the decades it took you to reach this point of post-tragic consciousness were not wasted years.
They were not years you lost to being stuck.
No, they were the necessary, grueling time required to map the architecture of the silence so you could finally step outside of it.
We have covered massive, heavy ground today. We started by completely shattering the simplistic myth of the single, villainous gatekeeper, moving past the movie version of adoption.
We stepped right into the room to uncover the uncoordinated, distributed grief of an entire family.
Examining how their private ledgers of loss mandate a manufactured consensus. We analyzed the cruel asymmetry of unsanctioned grief and the devastating paradox of the second exile, where achieving clarity and peace is actually punished with estrangement.
And finally, We looked at how to break the intergenerational transmission of that silence, not through the uselessness of guilt, but through the forensic precision of witnessing your own inherited reflexes.
And there is one final thought we should leave you, the listener, with. Something that synthesizes everything this framework has laid out and reframes the ultimate consequence of this journey.
I think this is the most important takeaway. Think about the physical act of building that independent provenance-first record. To the adoptive family system, that act looks like the ultimate betrayal.
It looks like an ungrateful severing of ties. It looks like permanent estrangement.
But consider the reality of what you are actually doing.
Yeah.
By documenting the objective truth of your origins, without needing their permission and without needing their consensus, you are single-handedly building the very first honest bridge between the ancestors you are severed from and the descendants you are desperately trying to protect.
You are acting as the first honest link in the chain.
You are. The family system views it as destruction, but it is actually the ultimate act of architectural creation. You aren't just breaking a cycle of distributed silence, you are replacing it, brick by brick, with a foundation of undeniable truth that your children and their children can finally stand on without the floor falling out from under them.
What a staggering reframing of estrangement. It's not walking away, it's building something that can actually bear the weight of reality.
It really is.
Thank you for taking this intense, unflinching journey with us today. This framework of distributed silence is heavy, but the lucidity it provides is profound. As you go back to your own dinner tables, your own workplaces, and your own complex family systems, we encourage you to look closely at the rooms you sit in.
Pay attention to the wiring.
Keep a critical eye out for those manufactured consensuses operating quietly in your own life. Who is holding a silence? What private ledger of loss are they protecting? And what happens to the wiring of the room when someone finally decides to ask a simple, factual question?
Be prepared, because you might just blow the doors off the vault.
Until next time, keep digging.